Creepypastas. Stories that have been copy and pasted throughout the internet since as early as the 1990s. If you've never heard of creepypastas, well, they're just fictional horror stories written by people on the internet, with some notable ones spreading like wildfire. Now today, I'm not going to be reading creepypastas. I do have a series dedicated to trying to read all the OG creepypastas, which is still going on in case you guys are interested in that. But no. This video is dedicated to trying to find the true events that inspired the creepypastas. Not only that, but this is a combined video. I know the title says creepypastas that were inspired by true events, but we're also going to be talking about events that were caused by creepypastas, such as the famous Slenderman stabbing that was caused because of the creepypasta. So yeah, there's a part 1 to this video and there's a part 2, and it's all in this video. I'm not making a separate one. This is 2 videos in one. And if you guys don't know me, my name is Tuv. Yeah, T-U-V. And I'll be your host today. If you're not subscribed, don't worry about subscribing. I'm gonna earn your subscription by the end of this video. Are you guys getting tired of that line? Please don't get tired of that line. Also, for people with post notifications on, I love y'all, by the way. Don't be shocked when you see a music video be uploaded to this main channel, because it's gonna happen within the next week, I think. It's a music video for my song Honey. And for the people thinking my music is garbage because I'm a YouTuber, you're actually right. No, you're wrong. The song is actually my most well-reviewed all-around song, and I'm really confident about it. But yeah, that's it for my little self-promo. Let's get right into the video. The Russian sleep experiment. This is one of the creepypastas that has been around for quite a while, and you might already know about it. What you may not know though is that it could have been inspired by real events, specifically in the times of war. More on that in a bit, but first let's recap the Russian sleep experiment story. For a lot of these, I've already read them on other videos on this channel. You can check those out in your own time. But yeah, just want to make that clear. If you want to hear like a beautiful man narrate these stories, I've done a lot of them already. So the story goes that during World War II, in the late 1940s, Russian researchers decided to experiment on 5 people, prisoners of war that had been deemed enemies. The goal was to use an experimental gas stimulant to keep them awake for 30 days, or maybe as long as they could, while being closely monitored, of course. To cooperate and not complain, the subjects had been lied to that they would be freed if they made it to the 30th day in the sealed chamber. They were given running water, a toilet, and dry food to last them all through. They also had books and cots to sleep in, but no bedding paraphernalia. To monitor them, the researchers created small windows, with glass about 5 inches thick and wired microphones on the inside. All went smoothly, but 5 days in, things took a rather dark turn because the subjects began experiencing paranoia, babbling about their past, and trying to trick the researchers into letting them out. This progressively got way worse since by day 9, 2 of the subjects screamed themselves silent. Yes, they screamed until they tore their vocal cords. This was followed by the smearing of feces and torn book pages on the windows as if to block the researchers out. And it gets even worse because after that, there was utter complete silence on the microphones. The only indicator that the 5 were alive was that they seemed to consume the same amount of oxygen that would be needed to keep 5 people alive. 3 days later, not knowing what else to do, the researchers opened the chamber, and saying what they discovered was horrific would be an understatement. The subjects had literally torn off body parts from themselves by hand. They had turned too wild to even be controlled, and even in the process of retrieving them, they killed 1 Russian soldier. 5 other soldiers died of suicide in the following weeks based on what they had just witnessed. Anyway, there was a lot more pushing and tugging as researchers tried to re-experiment on 4 of the alive subjects who at this point were weirdly begging to be taken back into the chamber. In the end, all test subjects die, but not without the last one leaving the researchers with this creepy quote. The quote goes, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go into the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." So, that was fake. That was all fiction. I want to make that clear before people start thinking that's real. What could this possibly have been inspired by? Well, it does line up with some historical events that are quite similarly unsettling. For instance, in the 1930s and 40s, Unit 731, a branch of the Imperial Japanese Army, did illegal lethal experiments on as many as 3,000 Chinese civilians as a way to develop chemical and biological weapons. The US also did experiment with mustard gas, and they would experiment on minority soldiers as preparation for what was expected to be a chemical-dominated Second World War.
It was a painful, horrifying, and secret part of America's history during World War II. The U.S. government conducted experiments with mustard gas and other chemicals on some U.S. troops at the time. That chapter of history was first revealed in the early 90s. Now, a new investigation by NPR finds the military used race-based experiments as part of those tests. African-American men, shown here in protective gear, as well as Japanese American and Puerto Rican soldiers, were singled out. These pictures show the forearms of men exposed to mustard gas and other agents. Some, like Rollins Edwards, are living with the effects decades later, including injuries to their skin.
The UK also did something similar, testing LSD on Royal Marines. I mean, you get the point. Governments did very questionable experiments on unsuspecting people with devastating results. Not very far from what the Russian sleep experiment is all about. The Alice killings. In a lot of the creepypastas, you're going to notice that a lot of the stories just seem corny, they seem fake, not real, but this one is really realistic. It's even been said that this specific story is sometimes confused for real true crime news. So what's the creepypasta? It follows a series of killings in Japan, which to this day remain both strange and unsolvable. Between 1999 and 2005, a total of 5 killings happened, and while these could have all just been random unrelated murders, they shared one thing in common, a calling card that the killer left at each scene. So basically, the killer would leave a playing card prominently displayed at each location, and while that's weird in and of itself, he went a step further and wrote the word Alice on each card. He wrote this with the victim's blood. The first victim, Sasaki Megumi, a 29-year-old restaurant owner and party lover, went missing after a party at a friend's house while walking home. She was discovered the next morning by a couple walking in the woods a mile from her home. A trail of blood on an unused path had gotten them curious, and finding her dead body, they called the police, who claimed they found a jack of spades crammed into her mouth. It had Alice written on it. The next victim, Yamane Akio, was abducted from his house on February 11th, 2001 by a hooded figure. He would later be found inside the bar where he used to perform, slumped over a table with his vocal cords ripped apart and what seemed like a shot to the head. In his hands was a clutched king of diamonds. Third was a teen girl, Kai Sakura, who was abducted a week before her high school graduation. She would be found 2 days later, buried in a shallow grave that had been marked by a Queen of Clubs card. It had been taped on a stick atop the grave. Last, there was Oshiro Hayato and Hina, siblings who were discovered dead in their beds on April 4th, 2005, in what seemed like a lethal injection attack. Each child held half of an Ace of Hearts playing card. Out of the horror and grief of losing her 2 kids, their mom is alleged to have committed suicide barely a year later. Very believable, right? Well, while all this is just a work of fiction, this creepypasta closely resembles actual killings that happened in Spain around 2003. The real story, which has even been turned into a docuseries by Netflix, is pretty chilling. It involves Alfredo Galan Sotillo, a man who walked into the police station on July 3rd, 2003, taking credit for murders that had come to be associated with an unknown figure. Quote, the playing card killer. He had been responsible for 6 murders and at each scene had left a playing card branded by a marker. That was actually the one detail that made the police believe Sotillo was the real killer, as he claimed, because no one else would know the card at each crime scene had a marker branding. Anyway, for the 6 murders, the then 26-year-old Sotillo was sentenced to 142 years in jail. Doppelgänger Creepypastas. This is a pretty short one on the list, as it's not really a specific creepypasta, but still a topic I found rather interesting. So, like I said, I'm talking about Doppelgänger Creepypastas. You know, the ones where someone will get an eerie feeling and even be convinced that a relative, partner, or friend is no longer who they were and has been replaced by someone else, or worse, something else. A commonly used example is from the 1956 film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where residents in a California town, fictional of course, got that same feeling, and it turns out they were not deluded at all. Their friends and family were indeed being replaced by imposters, aliens to be specific. This is the same idea with creepypastas that talk about an evil twin. For example, a mother sensing that their child had been replaced by something unholy or sinister, like some sort of darkness had awakened in them. In fact, that is a scenario in one of the shortest creepypastas around, just 2 sentences long. And yes, I'm about to read the creepypasta to you guys in full. It's only 2 sentences, so here you go. I begin tucking him into bed and he tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement and see him, another him under the bed, staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's somebody on my bed." The horror it depicts has actually been turned into a short film called Tuck Me In. And fun fact here, that 1-minute movie has won several awards, including in film festivals in Spain, Germany, Sweden, Italy, and Canada. So what real-world occurrence inspired these types of stories? Well, it comes from a medical condition called Capgras delusion, named after a French psychiatrist, Joseph Capgras. It's a psychological disorder where the patient becomes convinced that people around them have been replaced by imposters. It's actually been associated with several other underlying conditions, including brain chemistry changes due to mental illness or trauma. At the core of it though, it's the concept of dissonance. People with the condition cannot simply process the bits and pieces they don't like in the people around them. So while doing research, I found a video about a patient with Capgras delusion, and to give you guys context, basically he was in a car accident, was in a coma for 5 weeks, and when he woke up, he no longer saw his parents as his parents. He just saw them as people imitating his parents. So here's a little clip of that.
For 5 weeks, David lay in a coma. Serious injuries led to the loss of his right arm, but to everyone's relief, when he regained consciousness, his mental capacities seemed to be intact.
He was articulate, he was intelligent, not obviously psychotic or emotionally disturbed. He could read a newspaper. Everything seemed fine, except he had one profound delusion. He would look at his mother and he would say, "This woman, doctor, she looks exactly like my mother. But in fact, she's not my mother. She's an imposter. She's some other woman pretending to be my mother."
The injury to David's brain had brought on a very rare condition called the Capgras delusion.
Yeah, that video is 10 minutes long, so if you found that interesting, you can go watch that. The link is down in the description. And that video also touches on the Freudian Oedipus complex, which I found really interesting. But to sum that up, it has nothing to do with the creepypasta. I just want to say this because I found it interesting. But it's basically boys having unconscious infatuation towards their mothers and simultaneously seeing their father as competition or a rival because they're with their mother. I think it's a very cool psychological thing to talk about, but maybe one day I'll make like a video explaining my favorite psychoanalytic theories. But yeah, I just thought it was really cool. Okay, now back to the Capgras delusion. And it gets worse because according to V.S. Ramachandran, a neuroscientist at the University of California, there is no, quote, treatment and no amount of talk or reasoning that can cure the disorder. So while patients can receive medication, as is done with other mental illnesses, it remains vague as to what really reestablishes the connection between the perception and emotion in people with the Capgras condition. Abandoned by Disney. Alright, so this is another one that I've read in full on this channel, so I definitely am going to be referring to that video a lot. Definitely don't click out of this video and ruin the watch time. Give me the watch time. So first we gotta start with the actual story. So I'm gonna give you guys a summary of it. Abandoned by Disney follows a hunt by an urban explorer who went digging for answers for Mowgli's palace, an abandoned site. The site was supposed to be a resort in Emerald Isle, North Carolina, drawing inspiration from the Jungle Book movie from 1967, but it never took off. It had been built in the 90s amidst great opposition from locals who disapproved of everything from its theme to its unwelcome takeover of a large portion of the island. It braved all the resistance and got completed, but it then just suddenly stopped operating in a creepy way where it even got scrubbed from records and locals wouldn't answer questions about it. But that's not the creepiest bit, because as the explorer continued with his hunt, he found these two hidden areas, one signed with "Mascots Only, Thank You," and another with a door stenciled "Character Prep 1. Between the first and second areas, things got increasingly weird and spooky. You know, flickering lights, static-filled television, knocked over tables and chairs, and also untouched office paraphernalia. Yeah, you get the point. It was abandoned. The first area seemed to indicate employees had left in an evacuation kind of way rather than following a closing down procedure. The other area, well, you'd have to read the entire story or listen to the beautiful voice, the unhappy voice. That's what Tub stands for. Read it in the other video. Anyway, let's skip to the very end of it. It had everything from a Mickey Mouse costume that got up from the floor on its own to human skulls falling from costumes hanging by the wall. Stuff that if you witnessed would definitely keep you up at night. So, how was this inspired by true events? First, for clarity, Disney never opened a park in Emerald Isle, North Carolina, nor did it do any of the stuff described in the story, including releasing animals into the wild. What is true though, and thus might have formed the basis for this creepypasta, is that Disney has opened and closed theme parks in the past. For instance, in 1974 in Bay Lake, Florida, it opened a zoo called Treasure Island, later renamed Discovery Island. It ran until 1999, when it was abruptly shut down for unknown reasons. Interestingly, there is a a guy named Shane Perez, an urban explorer, who was claimed to have been the last known visitor to the island, having gone there in 2009 with friends. He apparently discovered odd things over there, like reptiles in jars, old photos of employees, and get this, the park still turns on at night, or at least it did by the time he visited. Actually, I'm pretty sure Matt Sansois, if that's how you pronounce the name, is actually the last person who at least documented him going to the abandoned island, and that was like in 2017. I think the most unbelievable part of Abandoned by Disney is that it took place in North Carolina. Why would Disney open up anything in North Carolina? I like North Carolina. I might move there one day. But why would Disney do that? I don't know. Yeah, let's head on to the next one. The Well for Hell. What does hell sound like? Well, have a listen. Okay, so I'm about to play some audio that claims it's actually from hell. It's a little disturbing, but it's not nothing I can't play on YouTube. This is it's just screaming, like distorted screaming. So I'm about to play that. I'm giving you warning. If you want to skip, you lame, but there's a timestamp right there, which you're not gonna skip because you're actually curious now. So here is the audio.
And I warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
So this clip is alleged to have been recorded by engineers who were drilling for oil, or maybe natural gas, in the Kola Peninsula in Siberia in 1989. The creepypasta, which though originating from newspapers in Finland, was largely popularized by tabloids and similar publications. It claims that as these engineers dug, they came across different things on their way down, including rare geological formations and even gold. However, after a whole year of digging and about 1,800 miles deep, suddenly their drilling equipment began rotating wildly, and they thought they had hit the Earth's core. There was so much heat searing out of the hole, and when they measured the temperatures, they got around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's not the weird part, it's what they found next that was extremely creepy. Apparently, there were inaudible sounds coming from down there. They lowered a highly sensitive microphone in to get better audio, and what they heard were agonizing screams. One of the engineers, hearing the audio, said, "We haven't penetrated the Earth's core, we've entered the gates of hell." I don't know how the microphone would have worked and not melted or stopped working because of the heats, but this is a creepypasta. I have to mention that there's also a variation where the story happened at an Alaskan oil rig. 13 workers had been drilling, but then got killed by the devil himself when he came roaring out of hell. There's also another version that claims workers smelled sulfur and heard sounds from the hole crying out, "Help us," or "Get us out of here." Anyway, is there really a well to hell? Well, I don't think so. But from evidence I've gathered, the story might have been inspired by the Kola Super Deep borehole found in the Kola Peninsula, bordering Russia, Finland, and Norway. This was a project probing what's beneath the Earth's surface level, and it ran from 1970 all the way to 1994. As of 1989, when the creepypasta claims engineers reached the core, the real project was about 12,262 meters deep. That's 7.6 miles. And just so you know, the project set the record for being the deepest hole in the world. And why did they stop? Well, very similar to the creepypasta, the project ended in the 1990s, 1994 to be specific, because of unexpectedly high temperatures. About 1.8 miles down, temperatures increased more than predicted, and by the time they were 7.6 miles down, they were at 356 degrees Fahrenheit. And at some point, the rock began behaving more like plastic, making drilling near impossible. Anyway, abandoned or not, this is likely the real-life event that inspired this creepypasta. Polybius. This is a pretty fascinating one due to its floating nature, and I'm saying that due to its lack of an exact storyline, since what's out there is more of an idea of what happened that gets retold in vague forms. The core details though are that Polybius was a video game that released in 1981 and was quite popular among kids in a particular arcade in a Portland, Oregon suburb. The game is said to have something sinister going on, like being a government experiment or something like that, and this is because anyone who played it apparently got anything from epilepsy to nightmares to forgetting where they lived. Again, the emphasis here is that it claimed to have had some sort of government meddling going on, including a quote-unquote proprietary behavior modification algorithm developed for the CIA by a military offshoot group. It's claimed that an operator of the arcade once said that men in black coats would come and collect records from the machine and leave behind the quarters that it had earned. They just cared about the information or how the game was played. Also, additional claims make this even creepier, saying that the game was not only weird looking, but that any kid who played it stop playing video games altogether, sort of like it was an anti-video game campaign. The game is also said to have disappeared after a month of being released with no trace. Oh, and the developer of the game was alleged to be a German company. Here it is on the screen. I'm gonna try to say it. Sinneslotion. You guys there's always a word I mispronounce in every single video. I'm trying to like pronounce these words correctly. I'm actually trying. Sinneslotion is how I will say this one. A name that loosely translates to sense deletion. Now, is there any truth to that at all? No. However, real-life events have occurred that are similar to the story. For instance, in 1981, Atari had a game called Tempest with a gameplay description very similar to Polybius. The suspicion, thus, is that Polybius might have been a location testing unit for Tempest or a faulty Tempest unit. None of this is absolute though, and it could all just be fan speculation. I actually found a source claiming Polybius is not a Tempest prototype and doesn't share anything at all with it. However, another piece of this puzzle is that in the same Portland, Oregon area in 1981, two people were reported to have fallen ill while playing video games, specifically at an arcade. First was Brian Morrow, a 12-year-old boy who played Asteroids, the space-themed multi-directional shooter game by Atari, for more than 28 hours while trying to break a record. He got stomach discomfort and bowed out. This was, however, attributed to anxiety and all the coke he drank. Then, on the same day, and in the same arcade as Brian, a guy named Michael Lopez developed a migraine while playing Tempest and collapsed on someone's lawn. Pretty sure you can see how such stories created speculation around that arcade. In fact, as Skeptoid, a publication, reports, the stories spread around middle schools like wildfire and freaked out kids to the core. Lavender Town Syndrome. So, Lavender Town Syndrome. This one is one I have also read on the channel. It's a really short one, and to my surprise, there's actually multiple versions of it. So, for this retelling of the story, I'm going to use the one called Come Follow Me. The story begins on February 27th, 1996, when the Pokemon game got released. It turns out that following the release, there was an immediate surge in deaths among kids aged between 10 to 15 via different forms of suicide, such as hanging or jumping from heights. These victims would also show sporadic behavior. For instance, screaming chaotically when asked why they wanted to harm themselves. The screams would intensify if Pokemon was mentioned, and they would try to leave any room with Pokemon Red or Green. This behavior confirmed the suspicion that the suicides were linked to the game somehow. So, investigations ensued, and the police first talked to Satoshi Tajiri, the director of the games, who, while not admitting anything, led them to the actual programmers responsible for the game's content. One of them, Takanori Uta, then referred these investigators to Junichi Masuda, the game composer, after telling them there was a rumor that the music of Lavender Town, one of the game's locations, was causing kids to be sick. They, however, hit a dead end because they listened to the music with Masuda present and nothing happened. It took a bit of digging on their part to finally find out that Chiro Miura, one of the developers, had committed suicide, and his friend, Koji Nishino, had locked himself in his apartment after the game came out. What followed is a bizarre uncovering of how Miura had programmed something sinister at the beginning of the game that would sort of call kids to follow a Pokemon into the void. I can't do that bit justice, so if you want to go read it, this is the Come Follow Me version. The version I read in my series where I'm reading all the creepypastas, I didn't read this one. So you're gonna have to go read it on your own, and you're not gonna have a beautiful voice telling the story. Anyway, what could have inspired this creepypasta? Well, it turns out that in 1997, in Japan, a total of 685 Japanese kids and teenagers were hospitalized after watching the Deno Senshi Porygon Pokemon episode. The episode, which translates to Computer Warrior Porygon, was banned immediately as it found to have caused epileptic seizures due to the flashing lights in one of the scenes. Yeah, it's in the background right now, but it's extremely slowed down, so don't worry about catching a seizure watching this video. You're not going to. It also serves a story that in the 90s in Japan, there had been a spike in suicide rates among kids. That could be a rumor though, because it was hard to find any authoritative supporting statistics. The Green Man. Okay, so this one is a mix between an urban legend and a creepypasta, but nonetheless, it's a pretty horrifying story and it's accompanied with a very scary image. So, also known as Charlie No Face, this story takes place in western Pennsylvania, where the Green Man, a horribly deformed man, is seen at night lurking by the roadside, blowing cigarette smoke via holes in his cheek, and trying to stay hidden from prying eyes. Charlie is said to have been in an accident that melted his face together and turned him green. What accident? Well, no one knows for sure, as some say he was working for a power company when he got shocked by a downed power line or struck by lightning, while others claim he was a factory worker splashed with with acid. Then, following the accident, depending on who you asked, he either died, making his subsequent sightings that of his ghost, or he ended up in isolation, boarded up in a house. One of the rumored locations where he went after the accident is South Park Township, somewhere just off Snowden Road, a site where the town stored rock salt for warm days. Now, as unnerving as it is, this story has a very similar true version that inspired it. Apparently, in August 1919, an 8-year-old boy, Ray Robinson, was a victim of a freak accident that ended up disfiguring him to the point that he got ostracized. He had been walking down a path in Newcastle, Pennsylvania with his friend and sister when they spotted a bird's nest perched up on a tree next to an abandoned trolley trestle. Curious, Ray decided to climb up and take a closer look, only to get electrocuted by a live wire that had been powering the trolley. Surprisingly, it said that a year earlier, another boy had been electrocuted by the same spot by a live wire and died after 2 weeks of pain and agony. So, Ray had been the second victim, and his electrocution was so bad that his, quote, nose, lips, ears, and eyes were all gone or misshapen. One of his hands even got blown off. He suffered greatly following the accident, but miraculously, doctors managed to have him survive. But that turned out to be just the start of his woes, because at the time, families would try to tuck away people who were different. Ray's disfigurement meant he was different and would be kept in an isolated room. However hopeful, Ray wanted to make things better for himself, refusing the isolation. So he kept up his favorite activities like listening to baseball games on the radio. He also learned to read Braille and make wallets and doormats from old tires. Soon enough, he was a man living in a small apartment in the family garage. Sometimes he would get fresh air, and he would take walks along local highways, especially Route 351 near Piney Fork Tunnel, known locally as Green Man Tunnel. He would do so alone and always at night, just because he didn't want to interact with anyone. Apparently, this is where the legend began, as people kept seeing him at night, and as rumors start and legends go on, I guess. Basically, that's where it started. Oh, and why Green Man? This is a pretty gross detail, but since his nose was an open wound, it would get infected so often that it would turn green. And also, why Charlie No Face? Nobody knows. That was probably just another rumor that randomly started. But yeah, that's actually the end for creepypastas inspired by true events. Now let's head on to part 2 of the video, where we're going to talk about events that were inspired by creepypastas. Part 2. Events inspired by creepypastas. Slenderman stabbing. Sometime before 2014, two 12-year-old girls, Morgan Gazier and Anissa Weyer, bumped into the Slenderman creepypasta. By their own admission, they found his story on the Creepypasta Wiki website, and what happened next was nothing less than horrific. But before we get into that, I must give you a quick summary of the Slenderman story. Again, there's a lot of versions of a lot of these stories, but I did read the most popular one on this channel. Just wanted to make that clear in case you want to go watch those after this one. So the story goes that there's this black-suited faceless man or creature with extremely slender and long arms and legs, and even more bizarrely, about 4 to 8 tentacles protruding from his back, and that he can contract at will. He can extend these tentacles unimaginably far in a way that induces fear in his victims, who it remains unknown as to whether he absorbs, kills, or takes to a different dimension. He dons the strength similar to Mr. Fantastic and walks on tendrils on his fingers like Dr. Octopus does. Again, there's different versions of it. Sometimes he just doesn't have tentacles and he's just a 7 or 8 foot man, white man. There's different versions. Now, in terms of activity, Slenderman lurks in suburban woods with groups of children and preys on children from these isolated locations. There are claimed sightings of him around, and his intentions are often to be kidnapping. Interestingly, he has been associated with historical references such as cave paintings in Brazil, Thief of the Gods in Egyptian tales, German woodcut stories, and even the Roman and English mythologies. Anyway, back to the story of the 12-year-olds. Once they found the story, they became excessively obsessed with him and decided that he was indeed real. And even more unnerving is that they believed in order to please him, they had to kill for him. This would apparently keep them and their families safe from his attacks. And when I say obsessed, I mean they were all about this guy. In Morgan Gazier's bedroom, for instance, police found what was termed as dozens of disturbing drawings of Slenderman, and get this, numerous disfigured dolls with the Slenderman symbol on them. Again, they truly believed Slenderman was real. He's not. He is not real. So, who did they kill, or at least attempt to kill? Well, their classmate and friend, 12-year-old Peyton Leutner, who they lured into the Wisconsin woods and stabbed a total of 19 times with a kitchen knife. And what's even worse is that after the stabbing, they claimed and told her that they were gonna go get help. But during a police interrogation, they admitted that no, they were just gonna leave her to die. They just lied to her, claiming they were gonna get help. Unknown to them, Leutner found the strength to crawl out of the woods to a nearby path where a bicyclist found her and took her to the hospital. Medics said it was a miracle she had survived, as apparently one of the stabbings had missed her heart by a few millimeters. Anyway, she of course identified the two girls and they were immediately arrested. And for their crime, they were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. They were actually planning this for a total of 6 months. Gager pled guilty and got 40 years in a psychiatric institute. Weir also pled guilty, though, to attempted second-degree intentional homicide, and also got sent to a psychiatric facility. She got conditional release in 2021, being ordered to wear a GPS monitor, which was then removed in September of 2023. Gager also recently, in April of 2024, tried appealing for a release at the Waukesha County Circuit, but got denied the request after doctors stated there were still some red flags with her. Judge Michael O. Boren ruled that the now 21-year-old is still a significant risk to herself and others. Ben drowned. So, Ben drowned. This is one that a lot of people have been requesting me to read the whole story, and it will be in Creepypasta Volume 3, which is currently being made. That will be in the future, so I'm just trying to avoid a bunch of comments of people telling me to read it. It's in the process. While being a game made for and about children, at some point, Majora's Mask grew to cultivate a bizarrely obsessed fanbase that saw it go from just another game in the Zelda franchise to the source of a tragic ending to a young girl's life in Cedartown, Georgia. And for this one, let's start with the real-world impact. So this took place on December 30th, 2016, when a 12-year-old girl who, while doing my research, apparently her family doesn't want her name being out there, so I'm not going to say the name, but I will tell the story. So this 12-year-old girl went live on an app and committed suicide outside of her home. The video, in classic internet fashion, spread all over the place. And soon enough, people were digging through her social media. People were trying to gather why she did it. She did post on her blog, and that became of particular interest because she wrote about being depressed and lonely and her troubled life at home. I believe that last part was referring to SA by a family member, something she admitted in her suicide video. Now, her last post was disturbing and upsetting, but one post that drew the attention of many was one where she mentioned Ben Drowned, who catfished her. Obviously, she was not talking to Ben Drowned because that's not a real person. Rather, it was someone impersonating Ben Drowned and catfishing her. So this person had catfished her into a false online relationship. She had written in her blog about how she couldn't live without him and accompanied the post with a picture. And not just any picture, but a fan art of this Ben Drowned, a well-known character from a creepypasta about Majora's Mask. Started by Alexander D. Hall, this creepypasta revolved around a haunted version of the game's cartridge that ends up causing unexplainable in-game events and horrifyingly in the player's own real life. He had posted the story on 4chan's board, claiming that his version of the game, which he got from a creepy old man, had weird glitches like Link, the main character, bursting into flames as the Song of Healing, which reversed time, played backwards. So where does Ben feature? Well, the old man told Hall that the game belonged to a kid named Ben who, quote, didn't live here anymore. Ben was saved as a file in there, and while Hall created a new one called Link, he found it weird that NPCs would sometimes call him Link and other times they'd call him Ben. He deleted Ben, and that's where things went downhill, from the game randomly freezing to popping up messages like Ben is getting lonely, and even files rewriting themselves. In one of the scenes dubbed Ben Drowned, there's also a message that repeatedly pops up: you shouldn't have done that. It comes in just before the Ben is lonely one. Again, just like the others, it would be best to go read the creepypasta or wait for me to read it in one of my future videos. So obviously, I think we could all agree it is rather odd for this girl, who was just so young, to have done that, to have mentioned Ben Drowned. And even creepier, she also mentioned Slenderman in the same post. Her death was quite one of a kind as it relates to creepypastas, and even got Hall, the creator of the story, questioning his responsibility for the negative consequences of such a work of fiction. Walking Sam. So we've already talked about Slenderman, and this next character isn't really that far off from the character's description. Known as Walking Sam, and likened to Slenderman, Boogeyman, and Tallman, this Pine Ridge Reservation figure has been described as 7 feet tall, lean, with long arms, no facial features, having bodies of Lakota men and women hanging from his arms, and here on Earth as either punishment or just for companionship. Now, just so we're on the same page, Pine Ridge Reservation is a region in South Dakota hosting about 19,779 people of the Oglala Sioux Lakota tribe. Anyway, back to the descriptions. It is said that, just like those of Slenderman, they have historical roots both in mythology and folklore. Local tribes, Dakota and Lakota, for instance, have claimed sightings of him, referring to him as a big man that blesses. Now, what's weird, and hence a true event linked to this creepypasta, is that his sightings have been associated with a string of suicides among teens. This is especially true during a claimed sighting in 2009, where a blogger named Mike Crowley shows an account where during a tribal council session, an elderly woman asked the government for help with the issue of Walking Man, as it related to suicides among young people. And for perspective, we're not talking about just a handful of suicides. No. According to a New York Times article, there had been at least 103 attempts by people aged anywhere from 12 to 24, 9 of those attempts being successful. Chris Carey, a local minister working with the youth, attributed the issue to the tall man spirit, where he was appearing to these kids and telling them to kill themselves. It didn't help that people were sharing videos on Facebook, encouraging each other to commit suicide, and even teaching how to tie a hangman's noose. Even more bizarre is that in the woods outside town, there were spots with ropes just hanging off the trees waiting for people to use them, and at one such spot, teenagers were found by John Tubols, a local pastor, just moments before they took action. I could go on, but I believe you get the picture. It just seemed to have been a really depressing area. And it's important to mention that since the Lakota and the other Sioux dialects are deeply spiritual, this phenomenon took different directions and interpretation, from being regarded as generational spiritual trauma to being seen as the gods protecting the forest, especially from Peter Matheson's descriptions in his 1983 book, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. But regardless of how you view it, this is a totally disturbing tale of a creepypasta influencing real life. Pope Lick Monster. This one is a fairly common urban legend and creepypasta, but what may be unknown is that it's always had a real life impact since it was created. Or at least I should say since it existed. So let me just quickly summarize the horror story of Pope Lick Monster. It revolves around Pope Lick Creek, an area in the Fisherville neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. Over the creek, there is a railroad trestle bridge, and underneath it, it has been rumored that a creature, half man, half goat, not only lives, but lurks around, trying to hypnotize those who come close. It would trick passersby into crossing the tracks, and they'd often get caught in between the bridge and get hit by the passing train. Now, sometime in April of 2016, 26-year-old Raquel Bain of Dayton, Ohio, together with her boyfriend, having heard of the Pope Lick Monster legend, decided to go and check the place out for themselves. An important note here is that the said bridge is about 80 to 100 feet high, and due to the way it was built, there's really nowhere to run if a train catches you going across. That is indeed what happened to this couple, with Bain's boyfriend managing to quickly hang off the side of the trestle, while Bain herself being too slow and getting knocked off by the Norfolk Southern Railway train. She fell down more than 80 feet and died of blunt force injury. Her boyfriend surprisingly survived unscathed. This was a rather unsettling death when considering that the two had not originally planned to visit the trestle, as the main reason for being around the place was their tour of Waverly Hill, where they intended to visit an abandoned sanatorium from the 20th century that was said to have housed tuberculosis patients. That would have still been a fun activity on its own, as visitors are treated to the use of detection equipment to try to spot paranormal activity. Also, an interesting detail about the trestle is that while many assume it's abandoned, a resident, Michelle Burns, told news reporters that it remains quite active, with the train going by every half an hour. Overall, a pretty tragic ending to a young nurse, all because of an urban legend / creepypasta that got her too curious. Squidward suicide. So this is a little, I guess, bonus one. I mean, it's actually an event that was caused due to the story being so popular, but this is a lighthearted one, which is why it's at the very end. But if you haven't heard about Squidward suicide, this is yet another one that I've read on the channel, but I'll summarize it. So basically, the story is told from the perspective of a Nickelodeon Studios intern from back in 2005. And while in the editing room with the lead animator and sound editors, they opened an unseen episode titled Fear of a Krabby Patty, where they were supposed to go through the final cut. As an inside inside joke, it had been named Squidward Suicide, with no expectation that the contents would be a literal reflection of the title. However, in a very unexpected turn, the episode was nothing short of horror. It was like they were being taunted, because whenever they would rewind, for instance, there was a particular frame where something new would show up each time. The episode starts with Squidward practicing his clarinet, then he gets booed, including by SpongeBob. Weird things begin to happen, and eventually, sitting at the edge of his bed, he takes a gun and blows his brains out. Now, one key detail is that towards the end, he had hyper-realistic eyes that were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. The edited image of the real Squidward, which accompanied the story, was kind of creepy and came to be known as Red Mist. Of course, I've left out some details, but you can go watch me narrate, which I've been promoting that video this whole time, but I'm sure you get the idea. Now, this creepypasta actually made its way into the actual SpongeBob show. Yeah, the real one that kids watch. It's pretty cool. It's like an Easter egg. It's in season 12 in an episode titled SpongeBob and Random Land. And it's about SpongeBob and Squidward visiting a mysterious town called Random Land. There, they do weird stuff, including walking into a lot of doors. Squidward opens 2 doors, and behind each, he finds a version of him. Then, the 3rd door opens, and voila! It's him with those hyper-realistic red eyes, just like in Red Mist. So yeah, the creepypasta made it into the real show. However, I have to clarify, in some countries, the Red Mist was censored by a young version of Squidward being shown instead. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you guys liked it, make sure to leave a like. If you guys haven't subscribed, did I earn your subscription? I think I did. I think I earned your subscription. Maybe I didn't. Maybe you gotta watch some more videos. I don't know. Hopefully I did though. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys for watching. I got a new music video coming out soon. If you want to hear the song, it's already out now. It's called Honey, with a comma. I thought it was cool. That's really it. I'll see you guys next time I upload.